for the global audience of people watching this video, what advice would you have for them to get into deep learning?
Okay, so my advice is sort of read the literature, but don't read too much of it. So this is advice I got from my advisor, which is very unlike what most people say. Most people say you should spend several years reading the literature, and then you should start working on your own ideas. And that may be true for some researchers, but for creative researchers, I think what you want to do is read a little bit of the literature and notice something that you think everybody is doing wrong. I'm contrarian in that sense. You look at it and it just doesn't feel right. And then figure out how to do it right. And then when people tell you that's no good, just keep at it. And I have a very good principle for helping people keep at it, which is either your intuitions are good or they're not. If your intuitions are good, you should follow them and you'll eventually be successful. If your intuitions are not good, it doesn't matter what you do.
I see. Right, it's inspiring advice, so might as well go for it.
You might as well trust your intuitions. There's no point not trusting them.
I see, yeah. Listen, I usually advise people to not just read, but replicate published papers. And maybe that puts a natural limiter on how many you could do, because replicating results is pretty time consuming. Yeah.
Yes, it's true that when you try and replicate a published paper, you discover all the little tricks necessary to make it to work.
I see.
The other advice I have is never stop programming.
I see.
Because if you give a student something to do, if they're a bad student, they'll come back and say it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work will be some little decision they made that they didn't realize was crucial. And if you give it to a good student, like Yi Wai Tay, for example, you can give him anything and he'll come back and he'll say it worked. I remember doing this once. And I said, but wait a minute, Yi Wai. Since we last talked, I realized it couldn't possibly work for the following reason. And Yi Wai said, oh yeah, well, I realized that right away, so I assumed you didn't mean that.
I see. Yeah, that's great, yeah. Let's see. Any other advice for people that want to break into AI and deep learning?
I think that's basically read enough so you start developing intuitions and then trust your intuitions.
I see. Cool. Yeah.
And go for it.
I see. Cool.
And
great.
Don't be too worried if everybody else says it's nonsense.
And I guess there's no way to know if others are right or wrong when they say it's nonsense, but you just have to go for it and then find out.
Right, but there's one thing, which is if you think it's a really good idea and other people tell you it's complete nonsense, then you know you're really onto something. So one example of that is when Radford and I first came up with variational methods, I sent mail explaining it to a former student of mine called Peter Brown, who knew a lot about EM. And he showed it to people who worked with him, called the Della Pietra brothers. They were twins, I think.
Yes, yes.
And he then told me later what they said. And they said to him, either this guy's drunk or he's just stupid. So they really, really thought it was nonsense. Now, it could have been partly the way I explained it, because I explained it in intuitive terms. But when you have what you think is a good idea and other people think it's complete rubbish, that's the sign of a really good idea.
Oh, I see.
Unless you're wrong.